Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander. Shelby, nice to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks, Dan. So happy to be here.
Guys, we were just talking before I threw on the recorder. You guys are in Austin, which is such a dynamic city these days. And I kind of had the pleasure of spending about 6 months there last year. I guess before we get into things, like how is Austin evolving? And I know that you're a native Austinite. How do you see that expanding, especially like the agency startup space in your experience?
Yeah, it's pretty wild, honestly. I do call myself a native Austinite, but I moved here when I was 12 with my family. And obviously, for a 12-year-old, it's really hard to move. We were moving from a different state. And I remember my dad was like, "We're moving to a cool town." And I was like, "Okay, sure." But it's so funny, like he was right. And he had kind of that foresight into like Austin was this cool town. But I think even he, really had no idea just how big the city has grown. And yeah, it's just crazy. There's so much opportunity and so much networking that can happen and different people that you can meet and celebrities moving here. And we were chatting, our office is it's not downtown, it's in Southwest Austin, kind of feels like it's out in the middle of nowhere, but even the city is even growing out here that way. So it's just an exciting place to be growing a business.
Totally. And I guess they call you a unicorn. When I was in Austin, anybody that was local that had been there like 12, you definitely have the bona fides because it was so rare. So rare to meet people that are from there. There's so many people moving in. So anyway, from there, would you mind getting into your background, what you're doing at Zilker, and kind of how you got involved in the PR space?
Sure. So I have been in PR for 10 years now. I started out as a purely book publicist working with nonfiction authors, and that kind of grew into the personal branding PR space like I am in now. I started Zilker with our founder a little over 5 years ago. So, now we're really focused, like I said, on personal branding, building thought leaders and people-driven brands. So I'm the Chief Publicity Officer. I focus on all of our publicity efforts in our earned media for clients, but we also do end-to-end branding, digital marketing, and many of our clients that we work with do still have books, but they're really, kind of a book as a marketing tool, reaching their target audience. I see your book there in the background. So a lot of that kind of thing. So busy entrepreneurs, business leaders, we work with some healthcare folks. We're really generalists, not in a certain industry at all, but really with the philosophy that people connect with other people. They don't connect with a faceless kind of organization. And that philosophy really can, lend itself to, any type of business, any type of organization.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So can you talk a little bit about before that? Because were you involved in PR before Zilker, or what was your professional career like?
Yeah, like I said, started out while I was still in college, came from an internship doing book PR for mostly nonfiction authors, but I did like Christian authors and again, doctors. And I was at a company for about 5 years. That was then acquired, worked at the company that acquired it, and then made the move to Zilker Media.
That makes sense. And so it sounds like you're doing a lot of PR work there. Can you talk? And it sounds like you're working with entrepreneurs, business leaders, people in lots of different spaces. Can you talk about the just kind of day to day, like what your work is like in that capacity now, and just kind of like how you're working with clients a little more tangibly?
Yeah, for sure. So I have an amazing team of 3 full-time publicists here at Zilker Media. We have about 20 clients just on the PR side that they are mostly running the day-to-day of, and I am kind of working with them, overseeing. We're a very collaborative department. We really focus kind of on 2 buckets of media. So we kind of focus on the big banner media, the name brands, the logos that everyone wants to have on their website, the Forbes, Fast Companies, CNNs, those types of things. And then the second bucket that we focus on is what we call micro media or niche media. So it can be podcasts, which I know you and I are going to be talking a little bit more about today, but It can also be like trade publications. There are so many trade publications that you have never heard of. A joke in PR is that there is a trade publication there's not one, but there's two trade publications about cattle ranchers, and
Yeah,
there's two types, one for one type of cows and one for the other type of cows. So that's not the type of media we're pitching, but we do get really niche, really trying to focus on like the right audience for our client. And like I said, we work in a bunch of different industries, so it's fun to always be learning about different things that I never thought I'd be learning about. Like we have one client who is big in the cement industry, and I've learned more about cement than I ever thought I would. And so, yeah, every day is different, which, I think that's why people like working in agencies, right? It's very
totally.
exciting.
Yeah, that's great. And to start out with the legacy side, the big banner side, do you find that most clients that come through your door are still interested in that? They're like, just get me in Forbes, or is that changing in terms of like what people are interested
Yeah.
in from the get-go?
Yeah, I think people are still interested in it, but more and more people are coming to us saying, I heard podcasts are the cool place to be. How do I get in podcasts? So
Yeah.
I do think people are always going to be excited about getting that name brand recognition. And so we do a lot of education in the biz dev process and once they come on as a client. And so I think most of our clients know, like, they're like, oh yes, these podcasts, these niche media, this is where I'm really going to see results, where I'm going to see ROI, but they still want the name brand medias. They want those logos to put on their website. So that's why we really try to split up what we're doing and make sure we're hitting both of those to make sure we're like getting a good mix of both.
And you mentioned the logos on the website thing, that sort of like stamp where it's like, you're validated, you got this mentioned in Forbes or a backlink or whatever it was.
Mhm.
Like, where do you see that trending? Like, do you think that that's how long does that stay something that's valuable to people to see Forbes on a website, or is that something
Mhm.
that is just diminishing more and more every day?
I mean, I don't see it going away anytime soon. We describe it as like authority by association. So if someone goes on your website, they don't know who you are, but they see the Forbes logo, they'll obviously trust Forbes. And so they're like, oh, this person is also trustworthy. So I think that most people still value that. Of course, I've been in PR for 10 years, like I said, so I have a healthy dose of cynicism around some of these things. And so I might go to someone's website and see all those logos, and I might be like, well, did they really get all of those places? Or are they just counting like press release hits or something like that? But I think an everyday like layperson is still trustworthy, whether or not that's great for like media literacy. But I don't see it going away. I think it's something that people still get really excited about and really want on their website.
Yeah, and I also think that, like, at least for me personally, sometimes I can be cynical but still be like subconsciously affected by that logo, right? Or I might be like, I know that you just probably got some passing mention somehow,
Right.
or you made it up, or it's something, or it's like connected to like a previous life or whatever, but it
Mhm.
still is going to sway me in ways I can't possibly comprehend. So I totally get the value of that. I guess on how has the podcast side sort of evolved for you? Was it like, were you just pitching to get on podcasts for clients from day one, or was there a moment when you're like, okay, this is like actually where the value is?
Yeah. I think it was kind of a slow and gradual transition. Back when I was doing only book PR, we were pitching like blogs, which no one's asking you to be on a blog anymore. We were pitching like internet radio, and it
Yeah,
just transitioned into podcasts being more and more of the opportunities that we were getting, especially for some of these nonfiction authors who were in really niche markets and had niche topics, and just kind of saw podcasts being a bigger place to get media placements. And I think just with podcasts blowing up, more and more people starting podcasts, the popularity of podcasts moving up, like I said, now in the last couple years, it's something people are asking for, where before it was kind of like a fun new thing, like, oh, we got you a podcast interview. And podcasts are just a really great way for someone who is wanting to get more earned media, but maybe cannot get in a Forbes or a Fast Company, and they just kind of want to dip their toes in, get some earned media that they can repurpose across all their content marketing. It's a little bit lower pressure. It's conversational. It's not like when you go on TV and you have to have your talking points super tight for 2 minutes or less.
Right.
So I think it's going to continue to be that way. And I think someone who's wanting to go and be in more podcasts, it's really being intentional about the podcasts that you're pitching yourself to, getting in front of the right audience, vetting the people, because there's so many, right? Like so many people
Totally.
starting podcasts and then stop them or go in a different direction. So I think you just have to be a little bit pickier, and we have to be pickier for our clients, the ones that we're pitching, to make sure they're going to be worthwhile.
Yeah, and we've sort of been on both sides of the fence in terms of like getting guests on the show like you are right now, and then getting me on shows and stuff. And it's, yeah, I guess like I remember in the early days of the business doing a lot more guest posts, and
Right.
that's just kind of gone away. And I'm glad,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like it's a lot of work, and
Yeah.
a lot of the times like you're kind of having conversations like this anyway with
Mm-hmm.
people that you meet, so you might as well throw on the recorder,
Right.
if it makes sense to.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that probably resonates with people. I guess like one thing that I hear from different people in our world in the agency space is like, is this a flash in the pan, or is this here to stay? And obviously it's like flash in the pan is probably the wrong word. It's been enough years of podcasting now. It's not
Right.
going away. But I guess like, do you think I guess this is a hard question, but where do you see this medium in 5 years if you had to guess?
I think if people are thinking of starting really to think of podcasts in a more strategic way, because we also, as an agency, help our clients start their own podcasts, right? Doing what you're doing, using them in a strategic way. And our clients are like, well, who's going to listen to my podcast? Like, no one's going to listen to it. And we're like, that is not the point. Right. The point is to invite people on strategically who you want to build relationships with. They'll share it with their own audience. That's going to double who's seeing the episode. So I think that thinking of like thought leaders, speakers, authors, just thinking of that more strategically when you're starting a podcast or going on a podcast. But yeah, I mean, with Spotify doing their own, I mean, when did Spotify launch their own podcast? Like that was within the last 2 years, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. With COVID, I can't remember
Yeah.
when things
Time moves
happened
funny.
anymore, but
Yeah.
I don't see, especially those super big podcasts like the Brene Brown podcasts of the world, I don't see those going away anytime soon. So I think that's really going to trickle down into some of the more thought leadership niche podcasts as well. They'll continue growing in popularity.
So one thing you mentioned was, the idea of finding like thought leaders and people that, kind of have these synergies with your clients. Are there ever surprises or just like things that people aren't considering to get those sorts of, or like opportunities, audiences that are in common? Like I love to hear just kind of like, what are those things that people don't always stay ahead of?
I mean, I think what's surprising to people is that a podcast opportunity is, it's more than just an earned media opportunity, more than just a PR opportunity. It's really networking. And so, we've had clients who've gone on pretty small podcasts, and then it turned into a new business deal for them. And that was from a super small podcast. And so if you're just saying, oh, I only want to go on the big podcast, you could be missing out on those opportunities. And so I think that's one thing that can be surprising to people. I also think obviously looking for the audience thinking of your target audience and your niche and what kind of podcasts are they listening to. And, you might have to broaden out just a little bit, but then pitch your content in a way that is specific to the podcast host and maybe be creative sometimes. So that would be my advice when kind of looking kind of and doing outside the box of trying to find that audience.
Makes sense. And to switch gears a little bit to the pitch, let's talk about that. What have you found to work and what have you found to not work for getting yourself and others on shows?
So the main advice that I give is to actually listen to an episode of the podcast, which seems super, super obvious, but it can be hard, especially if you are doing like corporate marketing at an agency and you have all your clients that you have to worry about, and you only have a little bit of time to maybe pitch yourself or pitch, whoever's doing the corporate marketing. But you can come up with a pretty templated pitch depending on the audience that you're going after. And then the only thing that you need to customize is that intro, and just saying like, hey, I liked this podcast. I found this helpful. This really resonated with me. This is something that I'm going to do after listening to this episode, and really trying to make it as genuine as possible, and more than just one sentence of like, hey, I liked the latest episode of your podcast. Do you want to interview me? And also just like taking a step back and being like, are you even looking for guests right now? If so, can you let me know the types of people you're looking for? And even if it doesn't work out for you, maybe you can refer someone else. Again, thinking of it as almost more networking than pitching, especially if people are at an agency and they're PR people like me and come from a more traditional background. They might just want to pitch based on what type of guests have been on the show before. But we found that podcast hosts are a lot more receptive to just a note that's like, hey, what kind of guests are you looking for? How can I help you? If you pitch a traditional journalist, like, oh, who are you writing about? They'll just be like, oh, well, go read articles. You'll be able to tell. And like, they're probably like not going to give you, spell out that advice for you. But podcast hosts are different in that way.
Yeah, and to kind of compare notes on that, because I've been on both sides of the fence, like pitching myself or doing that through one of our partners, and then getting pitches all the time. So I'm sure there's a lot of things that work well. I've found the main thing that guides our editorial content are people like yourself, interesting topics, interesting agencies that are doing cool things, cross-reference with the above. And sometimes there's a lot of intangibles that go into that, I've found.
Yeah.
So I think like I'll talk about your pitch in a second. I think another one that's worked well is like a smattering of guests. There's some media shops that are like, here's like 4 people. Do any of these look interesting to you? And then it's sort of just more shots on goal. Cause like, we're very careful and picky about who comes on the show. At the same time, we need to fill our calendar. So it's something we have to make decisions on it. And that's pretty much every show, I would guess. To bring this to your pitch, which I thought was good, I think one thing that's like challenging is you can listen to a whole episode and like really understand a show. The hard thing is conveying that you actually did that, because there's plenty of people that don't listen to shows but just say, hey, I heard XYZ interview and on ABC topic, and then everyone's like, did you really? So is there any way you found to do that well, to actually like convey that you have listened when you have, and to have your work show up, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, our format of doing that customized intro, we've gotten great feedback from, and we've gotten hosts saying, I get so many bad pitches, but yours was, actually, hit the mark, and I could tell you really listened to an episode. So again, I think, and I would hope that the work we put into that first paragraph of a pitch saying, we listened to this episode, we liked it. In my experience, that has proven that we understand the audience of the show. And even if we do miss the mark, I think that we tried so hard in that customized intro that people are willing to be like, this is not the type of guest that I'm looking for, but I am looking for XYZ, or, reach out to me in a couple months. So again, really just trying to make it come across as really genuine. And podcasters are influencers, and it's a difference than traditional media. And I think, and hopefully you don't like find offense to this, but like that paragraph kind of butters them up a little bit, and being like, I loved this episode. I found it helpful. And like I said, we've really seen a lot of great feedback from that and have found that to be a good strategy.
No, not offended at all. And we're doing a similar thing all day for clients because we focus on doing sales outreach to get
Yeah,
meetings. So
exactly.
it's the same thing. And but the one thing that I thought, to get even more meta, and the one thing that I thought was interesting, was the thing that I think swayed me the most was I'd heard of Zilker and I'd passed by your offices and everything like that. And I was like, oh, Zilker's kind of been on my radar. That
Mhm.
plus the interesting pitch. And then I sort of started thinking about how like PR is maybe one of the few areas in the marketing world, not the only one, where like the PR shop is actually a player in the service that's being delivered versus
Yep.
like what we do, we're ghost in the machine. A lot of our
Mhm.
clients, they build a website, they do this or that campaign. Nobody
Yep.
knows they were there for the most part. So can you talk about that a little bit? Like how much has the Zilker brand helped you secure meetings for your clients, and like how do you feel
Mhm.
about that?
Yeah, we are a newer company. We're 5 years old, but so what's interesting is that Zilker Park is a very famous park in Austin. It's where ACL is. So people who are listening who are maybe aren't familiar with Zilker Park. So in Austin, I think we've been able to build a reputation just because we named our company after Zilker Park, and people
Mhm.
regionally, like if I'm talking to people from Dallas or Houston, they're like, "Oh yeah, Zilker Media, Zilker Park. I love Zilker Park." So,
Smart. Yeah.
that has helped us, I think, in Austin and regionally. And any type of PR person is going to tell you, oh, it's all about the relationships. It's building relationships with media, whether that is podcasters or more traditional journalists. And so, we have been able to build those relationships kind of in both buckets of media, which really helps. And I think it's just making sure that your whole team is really proud of the pitches that they're sending out. Because I do think journalists, they see the name of the PR agency in the email and they're going to say, oh, another pitch from Zilker Media. Was the last one I saw bad? Was it good? Did I really like it? And that's any PR company. And obviously, there are massively huge PR firms, and some are more recognizable than others. And so I think those bigger names have certainly built themselves up where that people might trust their name or at least be more name recognizable. But there are so many PR pros. There's something like 5 PR people to every one journalist. And so I might be giving the name of a PR firm more hype than it's worth. I think a lot of journalists are just like delete, delete, delete. Like they're not even taking the time to like look at who the PR firm was unless they really recognize the name of the specific publicist that sent them the email. So
Yeah,
who knows?
and I've sort of crossed paths with like enough or number of PR shops, and their like sole value prop is like, oh, my friend works at Forbes, or like, oh, we have this
Right.
relationship at XYZ publication. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big thing in PR is, oh, what media relationships do you have? And those help you, but at the end of the day, you can't control the journalist. You can't control what story they're going to say yes or no to. And, it's not an exact science, but
Yeah.
obviously it does help to have those relationships.
Yeah, and it was funny. I remember like in previous life investing in PR, and it was like we had one story because we had done this video that went semi-viral. I won't get into details
Mhm.
because it'll take too long. This was for an animation studio, and then after that, the PR person would hit us up, and then we would just say like, "There's really no other story that we have that's newsworthy," because that used to be the
Mhm.
standard, was like it has to be at least somewhat newsworthy, and then with the podcast sphere, that standard sort of changes, I guess. It's like, do you have interesting things to talk about? So it kind of opens up a lot
Yeah.
more. Yeah. And so are you guys also helping people set up their own shows, or is it pretty much just getting external placements?
That's not specifically in my department, but on our digital marketing and branding department, we do help people set up their own podcasts. We have a bank client here in town that recently started their podcast. I don't think it's launched yet. I still think they're in pre-production, but any of that sort of relationship driven marketing where you are thinking of the people that you want to build relationships with and inviting them onto your show, that's something we really push for. Not all of our clients have the resources to do a podcast or even the time, but even if it's like doing an interview series on their blog, that's something that we're constantly pushing for and think there's a lot of value in.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it seems like for the podcast sphere, for like getting guests on shows, it pretty much has to be like a B2B or like a complex offer for it to make sense. But correct me if I'm wrong, like what are you seeing out there in terms of what your clients are focusing on selling?
Yeah, so all of our clients, not all of them, but like I said, they're in a variety of different industries, but most are B2B. And so, yeah, that's, the who is your, what companies are you trying to sell for? Who are the influencers there that we can invite on the show or engage with in some sort of way? And you mentioned contributed content earlier. We still place a good amount of contributed content, especially in those really niche trade publications like I was talking about. So we'll also have someone give a quote for one of our articles. That kind of thing is another way where we're really trying to drive the relationship through the content.
And can you talk about your best clients, the ones that are just absolutely killing it? What are they doing differently? Like, how are they approaching these interviews? If there's any commonalities that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think that the ones who are really killing it are not afraid to talk about themselves and get personal and open up. Honest, obviously not all content like lends itself for that, especially if you are going, very B2B and talking more about business. But I think that that is something that people want to connect with, and not being afraid to kind of open up and talk about your struggles or things like that, and just trying to make it an interesting conversation. And another thing to, kind of taking it in a completely different direction, but so many of our clients, I think, are like, oh, I did the interview, that's it. And we really are coaching them and saying, like, no, you need to be sharing it on your social, you need like multiple times, you need to be reusing the content, you need to be putting it in your newsletter, sending it to your biz dev team so that they can be sharing it with people. So I think the ones who really make sure that they're taking it that next step further and remarketing it across all of their channels, they are really getting the most value out of the interviews.
I guess with that, like, how are they thinking about this in the scheme of everything else? Like, in a sort of traditional marketing sense, you would drive people to a certain place. Are your clients doing that? Are they like giving
Yeah.
away things, or how to get tactical?
Mhm.
Like, what are they typically doing?
Yeah, so we also do quiz marketing. And so we create quizzes for our clients. So we train them to plug the quiz at the end of the interview. I do not have a quiz, sadly, that I can be plugging for you now as an example, but obviously at the end of every podcast, where can people go to learn more, and training them to say, oh, I have this quiz on my website that relates to my content. People can go here to learn more. And then people have to put in their email address to take the quiz. And then so that audience is getting converted to their owned media. And so that type of like instantaneous ROI you don't see in any other type of PR. So we do a lot of quiz marketing. If they don't have a quiz, trying to have some other sort of lead magnet or piece of content that is really going to give value to an audience, so that we can be converting people over that way, and the earned media can be a bigger part of a holistic marketing plan.
Sure. And that's interesting because I've never heard of like quiz marketing per se. I've heard of like, surveys and that kind of thing. But can you give an example of that,
Mhm.
that you can share of a quiz that you guys are running?
Yeah, so I will give kind of our quintessential example. We worked on a book called The Confidence Code. It was by two journalists, Claire Shipman and Caddy Kay. And it was a book measuring, how confident are you? And it was primarily aimed at women. And they worked with an academic on the quiz. So it was very robust. It had great questions. It wasn't some lame little like thing that you went through, but it was still short. I think it took about 10 minutes. And since they were journalists, they had really amazing media connections, and they plugged it on, I think it was the Today Show, and then they also plugged it on NPR. And both times the software was super new. It broke both times. And so they just got thousands and thousands and thousands of quiz takers, and the software works now. It doesn't break when it's overloaded. That was years and years ago. But yeah, we have, case studies like that where people are, getting tons of quiz takers, but, we'll also implement the quiz into paid ads on social. We do that depending on the client. Again, I'm not the paid social or digital marketing expert, so I can't speak to the strategy there, but yeah, we found that quizzes are a really compelling call to action, and love to train people to be plugging them on their interviews. It's a fun thing to be able to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think kind of related to that, most of our audience are agency owners and leaders. And I think there's a lot of hand wringing about what services to focus on. What do you recommend to people? And then how do you keep their business and bring other things into the mix? So can you talk about that a little bit? Like, are you typically starting most clients on external podcasts? How have you decided like what services to keep at Zilker versus what to phase out? I'd just love to hear about your strategy a little bit.
Yeah, I think that if someone comes to us and they have zero PR, it's really important that they do get started and kind of laying that groundwork. PR begets more PR, but you also have to practice going on podcasts. You have to have a couple good media placements under your belt to give you that credibility to go off and do certain things. So we will, start people off on podcasts. Like I said, it's a really great way to kind of start to build out that earned media. We are doing social media management, but also oversight. So telling people, here's the channels you should be focusing on, doing audits of, do you have a really old website that needs to be updated? Do you have a YouTube channel from 10 years ago that you need to go back and get rid of? So I think like when we're really talking about people coming to us who are laying the groundwork, that's what we start with. And as they kind of get more and more advanced, maybe we are adding in other types of media or doing some big social media campaigns. But as far as services, our agency has decided not to do, I mean, like I said, we do guest contributed content, but like you said, that is kind of phasing out a little bit. But we used to do a lot more guest contributed content, and we were placing things like crazy, but that took a lot of manpower. It took a lot of like ghostwriters that we needed to contract out. And so that type of PR, I think, has just become a little like less popular. So we've kind of phased that out a little bit. And I think it's just looking at, what's really going to bring value to our clients and the audience that they are looking at. And we still do guest contributed content when it's the right fit, but we're not like heavily pushing it as its own standalone service anymore.
Yeah. And it seems like with podcast interviews, the upside is you don't have to have a bunch of writers. It's like your clients are kind of bringing the work home once you've sort of teed up everything.
Right.
I guess the challenge though is you're left with the performance of your clients. You can tell them to do this, you can make the one cheater, but ultimately like they've got to kind of bring it on the interviews. So um
Yeah.
can you talk about that a little bit? Like if you had clients who are like, you just can't use podcasts as a route, or like, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, and there's vetting, that happens. And we're not going to put someone on a podcast who's not comfortable or we don't think is ready. Again, we try to tell people like, you got to listen to an interview ahead of time just to even like get a sense for the host. So you're not going into it completely blind. More and more podcasts are doing like pre-interview calls, which I think is really nice, which can be an extra step, scheduling another, 10-minute call in your day or whatever. But it's good to just see like if you have a rapport and kind of chemistry with the host. But like I said, we're doing trainings, and we'll listen to the podcasts after they come out and give feedback and just try to be really honest. And again, starting people off maybe on like a practice show, like a podcaster who we have a really great relationship with, and we know they're not going to throw them any like hardball questions or anything like that. So there are plenty of strategies that we have there, but most of our clients are amazing experts. Like I said, a lot of them have books, and so they're very familiar with their content, and I tell them it's a conversation, just go have fun. And if the conversation goes a different place, it's okay. Just roll with it. Like it's supposed to be fun.
Yeah, makes sense. And with that, do you yourself listen to podcasts? And it's okay if not, because not everybody does. But if so, what are your favorites?
I do listen to podcasts since my day-to-day 9 to 5 is so much ingrained in kind of the business world. I do not listen to business podcasts in my kind of off time unless I'm listening to it to listen to a client or help a client prepare. I kind of like a lot of the society and cultural podcasts. Like I really like Maintenance Phase and You're Wrong About. I was just listening to a podcast about like the Kardashians. Like I'm much more in the pop culture, but I have a hour-long commute out here, so I have lots of time to listen to podcasts. And like I said, I think they're not going away. People are enjoying them. So hoping I can just, have lots more to listen to in the future.
Yeah, that's definitely a nice and pretty commute out that in that part of the country. And what I find interesting is just how much experimentation there is on formats, and I've sort of tried to think about, can there be like an interesting narrative arc to like a boring business podcast like ours, right? Like, can there be a difference of emphasis from like one season or one year to the other? But it does take a lot of time and it takes a lot of thinking to plan out that stuff. And we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants sometimes to get episodes shipped, right? So lots to think about there. But Shelby, this has been great. I guess kind of getting towards the end of our time. How can people get in touch, follow what you're up to, etc.?
Yeah, so I am at Shelby Yonner. That's Yonner with a J, Janner, on Twitter and LinkedIn. I often talk about the same kind of stuff on both those platforms. You can also follow us at Zilker Media. And I'll also plug, we have a podcast guesting service called Podcast Guest Insider. And it's not a database, it's an email subscription service. So you subscribe, we have 3 niches: business, healthcare, and entrepreneurship. And you get 2 emails a month that have 5 vetted podcasts, the contact information, the types of guests they're looking for, and you get them to your inbox, and you just have to, create your pitch and send it off. So we're doing the first month free right now. So it'll be 10 free podcasts that you can get, that people can get if they're interested.
Awesome. We'll get that linked up. Shelby, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.